A little bit about me to start with. And also I'd make this note, the very last slide today is an advertisement for my services in one way or another, whether it's the book or whether it's software. So yeah, the last slide is that, but it's not something I push heavily at the moment. I'm getting some of these free presentations together, and they will continue next month as well, as you'll see later on. So about me, I got involved in health and safety around 1995, something like that. And since then I've either been a manager, a director or a consultant on health and safety. But quite early on, I got very interested in psychological aspects of safety. So things like stress, things like why people do illogical things when they're in the workplace. Sort of why do you put your hand in a big noisy machine when you can see that it's a big noisy thing that could sever your fingers? So I did what a lot of people do. I did the short courses with various organisations, and I thought, well, I agree with that, disagree with this, and I wondered what was going on. So I took the slightly unusual step of going back to the Open University and studying a psychology degree for a few years, during which time, and since I've hassled my tutors on how does this apply in the workplace, because some of it was more general. But over the years come to some conclusions, and although I don't know everything about this subject, hopefully today I'll be able to give you a starting point, and with the follow-up free presentations over the next couple of months, maybe dig a bit deeper if you want to. So hopefully it gives you enough interesting material to continue studying the subject, and also questioning whether I'm right or wrong about these things in the same way I did 20 years ago when I was starting out. And yes, if you enjoy this presentation, you may be interested in Psychology and Safety 2, which will be at the end of June. That's also free. But we'll give you an introduction to it today. So as you can see, possibly on the first slide, there's a quote there. The problem with the mathematics of human behaviour is that there are too many ugly variables, which was Hannibal Lecter from the TV series. But he was right. When it comes to the workplace, you'll know yourselves that there are a lot of human variables, and they can confuse even very logical systems that get put into place. And sometimes it can be the human element putting the systems into place that causes the problems, how they're designed and so forth. For some reason, why is my screen not changing? Sorry about this. The screen isn't changing. If I can get the screen to change. Bear with me, sorry about this. Oops. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, these are the main subjects we'll be looking at today. Making decisions and risk, changing people's minds, well, within reason. Optimism bias, why we think other things will happen, why we think bad things will happen to us, but the good things, you know, and vice versa. Bystander intervention, communication, compliance in the workplace, and a little bit on distraction towards the end. We'll be sort of going through those quite quickly, and maybe in the follow-up sessions we'll go into a bit more detail on that sort of thing. So making decisions and risk assessment. We might not think so, but there are times when human beings are really bad at making decisions. In fact, casinos make a lot of money out of humans making bad decisions. It's like the picture you can see on the screen there. Should the raccoon take another card? We don't have all the information that's necessary for that at the moment. People do it in casinos, but we don't know if that card is a 10 or a 2, or whether they will go bust or not if they take more cards. So people tend to get to a stage like that and then they guess. A lot of accidents and near misses in the workplace come down to people making that sort of bad decision. They think it could be right, they gamble that it'll be okay, but they don't have the information that's necessary for it. And by the end of the day, you probably wonder how we make any good decisions as well. One thing is certain, we all make bad decisions at some point. Now, before we look at just take a tour down why we make bad decisions and why we think about things in certain ways, And it's sometimes down to how the memory works as well. For example, if I were to ask you how many dogs you've seen on the lead in recent days, you may be struggling to come to a number. But if I ask you how many hyenas you've seen on a lead, you probably come to 0 pretty quickly. And that's because our minds are pretty good at remembering things that pop out, some things that have an emotional content. So if it was a hyena, it would probably be fear or maybe amusement if you saw one of those on a lead in the road. But it would certainly stick in the memory more. It's that sort of image that can help. But on the other hand, if we were to ask how many words in the dictionary have the 3rd letter P, then I think we'd all struggle with that. It's more of a computational issue. But sometimes that's the way procedures in the workplace work. It's somewhere between those two. You've got a set of instructions, almost like finding the 3rd letter words for 3rd letter P in the dictionary, but nothing like as obvious as how many hyenas there are in your local neighbourhood. So our memories work in that way, and that can sort of let people down at times, and we'll come back to that. If we move on, making bad decisions and risk. Yeah, suppose you have a workplace procedure for people making a product of some sort, and it has 5 steps. If they get interrupted, they may forget whereabouts they are in that five steps. So they may go back to the production method and forget to put a guard back on and lose a finger. It's that sort of issue where memory can let us down in that. If we're interrupted while we're doing something, we can forget where we were in the process, and we can miss an obvious step that was for safety purposes. Another type of bad decision is based on gambling. We saw with the raccoon, we didn't have all the information, and that's the way casinos like to keep us. They don't give us all the information, and we try to work off the chances of a gain against the value of that gain, and that can be where things get a little bit more tricky. With that in mind, there was a 16th century philosopher who came up with a mathematical process for making good decisions all the time and getting it right. The problem was that you needed to have pretty much all the information in the universe, and we don't have that. We have little bits of information that are given to us. We rarely know everything that's going on in our own living room, never mind what's going on in the workplace at all times. So the logical way for us is to weigh up whether to take a chance is something like gain versus chances of gain versus the value of gain. Rarely have numerical values for that work. In the casino, you could bet £1 and you could win £1,000, but it might take 5,000 attempts to get it. In the workplace, it's more difficult than that. You might have a process that looks like it may have dangerous elements to it, but we haven't done it enough times and made enough statistical judgments to know whether you're going to lose a leg if you do it that 5,000th time. And that's where things start getting difficult, and where people do gamble with things along the way. I think we've probably all come across areas where people have climbed into machines or climbed up the side of buildings, that sort of thing, without thinking about it thoroughly. They thought, we'll get away with it this time, and it's that 1 in 5,000 that it'll go wrong, and they take that chance. And we tend to make the assumption that we'll be okay when we're doing these risky activities. Excuse me. One of the reasons for that is optimism bias. If you want to look online for more information about optimism bias, there's an American psychologist called Tali Sharrow, and she's very good at this. She's written a book on it, and she's actually got some good YouTube videos out there that will tell you some more. But basic theory of optimism bias is that we have a tendency to believe that bad things will happen to other people. The classic questions with that are whether people think they will get cancer. It's about 50-50 in the UK now. I think they say 1 in 2 of us will get cancer, but a lot of people will have their chances that they think they'll have a 75% chance of it. Some will think a 10% chance of getting cancer. And it's an interesting thing, because if you tell someone who thinks they have a 75% chance of getting cancer that it's only 50%, then they're quite willing to come down to that level and think, oh, well, yes, better than I first thought. But people who first thought they had only a 10% chance of getting cancer, they're reluctant to go up to the 50%. And that's the optimism bias in play. They think that it will be different for them and the bad things will happen to other people. So they'll try to stick to their 10%. And general judgments are affected in that way too. For example, one of the other questions I saw that she'd asked was asking people on their wedding day what they thought their chances of getting divorced were. I think in the UK and the US it's about 40% chance. And even after they're told that, then they go with 0% because it's their wedding day and no one wants to think about that. But there is a general optimism bias going into situations that bad things will happen to other people. Even with the skyscraper buildings, we know that quite a few people did fall off those, but presumably those guys thought that happened to other people and they would continue working in what were at times horrific circumstances there. So yeah, it can affect the way that we gamble. We think the bad things will happen to other people. And when you're in a casino, you think, yeah, I've got a real chance of winning this money. So you tend to think in that instance that the good thing will happen to you and you risk your money. So it also goes through into the workplace. If you go into tool rooms in a lot of factories, just as an example, you'll find that people have removed the guards from things like lathes and chop saws and that type of thing. And they tend to have the opinion that the bad things will happen to somebody else in another workplace. I'll be fine because I know what I'm doing. And then occasionally it does go wrong and people lose bits of themselves, which is a bit unfortunate, but that's the way the human mind works. So how can we counteract that? Well, we can do a lot of risk assessments and not have situations like that arise. I think I've seen situations like that at home, never mind in the workplace. But it's difficult. It is a difficult thing. It's tempting to go in and quote rules and regulations, but really it's worthwhile looking at the systems and how you implement them. There's a thing in the sales and advertising industry called MAYA, or MAYA, some people pronounce it, and it's called most advanced yet acceptable. And the reason for that is that although advertisers use the word new or improved all the time, they use it in a very special context. They use it in the context of something that people are used to, and then there's an extension of that. This is a new version of that, so that they know it's something that they're familiar with. If it's something that's genuinely new, that's when you tend to get a lot more kickback off employees and they don't want a completely new system. Excuse me. But using the advertiser's way of doing it, most advanced yet acceptable, it can be useful. And it can be useful also to ask people, in the tool room example, okay, we know that you want to do things safely, but how can you reconcile doing it with the guards off with doing things safely? So it's a tricky one to get round. Bear with me a second. I just need another sip of water. Throat goes a bit dry during these things. Hopefully this is making sense so far. But please, in the feedback, do say if I've rattled through this too quickly, or if you think it could have been done slightly differently or something. Yeah, so the advertisers, they use it in that special context of it. It's what you're familiar with, but this is a bit better. And you can do that with things in the workplace. You can introduce a system that's similar to the old one, but just a bit more advanced. And you probably get more traction with those smaller steps rather than going on to one massive step to a brand new system. So it's sometimes difficult to hold back on things. It's not a silver bullet for every situation, but it might at least make employees think. Maybe get some quick results in some areas, but sometimes you're going to have to just take it a bit more slowly. Maybe come back to that in the second presentation on this, go into a bit more detail on it. So again, moving on from that, but on a similar theme, gaining compliance in the workplace. there's a professor in the US at Stanford University, Dan Ariely. He did some interesting work along these lines. And it's interesting to see the way people think about complying with rules. He did some tests, basically. He had some students in the university, and he told them they could do a maths test. It was about 10 questions. It was short and relatively easy. They had quite a few volunteers for it. And what happened was, in the first instance, they told the students, for every question you get right, you'll get $1, and the invigilator will give you money on the way out. So the papers were checked as they went, and they got about $5 or $7 each as they were going. It wasn't bad for just a few minutes' work. After that, they did a test where they said, okay, we can get $1 each for every question you get right, but this time we're not going to check. You can just do whatever you want with the paper. Just tell the invigilator how many you got right, and from there you get your $1 per question. And from there, as Dan Ariely says, people got smarter. Then instead of 5 to 7, they got sort of $6 to $9 each. It was an improvement. But thereafter, he looked at how people would comply with others. And they had someone come in with a sweatshirt on that clearly said that they were from another university. At the beginning of the test, they were told again, you know, you can tell the invigilator how many you got right, and you'll get $1 per question. Very early on in that test, the chap who had the sweatshirt on from the other university stood up and said, yeah, I've finished, I got 10 right, took his $10 and left. Interesting thing was, the other students then went back to the more honest scenario of sort of $5 to $7. It was as though they were saying, that's what that other university does, but we're this university and we do things by the rules. And they tested that scenario by telling students that they were signed up to the honour system. And again, they stayed reasonably more within the $5 to $7 range rather than making up a couple of extra dollars worth, despite the fact that there was no honour system. So yeah, there was compliance with rules that sort of came in a quite subtle way, where they were acting as a team rather than acting like the other universities. But yeah, he did that also with, well, another interesting bit he did was with insurance companies, with claims. Instead of signing at the end of the claim sheet like we usually do, if you have a claim for anything like home insurance or cars, that you sign at the end to say everything that I've said was true. You got them to sign in advance and say everything I'm about to say is true on the rest of the form. And the claims dropped by about 30%. And it was a bit like people not willing to lie after they've said they're going to tell the truth. So there are options there with workplace training or with procedures that are put into place to get people to sign in advance to say yes, they will take on board what they're being told. Interestingly, the insurance companies didn't pursue that. For some reason, they like to pay out a certain amount of money just to make people feel that they're a good insurance company. So yeah, there are ways that getting compliance can be done subtly rather than blatantly. But it's all, having said that, it's always a good idea to tell people in advance what you're doing. I know in one workplace, they after lunch break, they played faster-paced music on the tannoy to get people woken up and working faster again on the production lines, which does work. It worked in that situation. What didn't work was when people found out that they were being treated like sort of lab rats, and then there was a bit of a revolt about it, so things got a bit messy. But if you tell people in advance that's why you're going to do things, and it's sort of for their benefit as much as the business, then there's a better reaction from it. So it's got to, even with employing some psychological elements to these things, honesty really comes out top on that. And again, when it comes to getting people to do the right thing, it's quite a powerful statement that on the slide. I always wondered why somebody didn't do something about that. Then I realized I am somebody. One of the things that has been reproduced around the world, one of the classic experiments, is on bystander intervention. you may have heard of this. It's where people, if they're on their own and feeling unwell in a public place where there's a lot of people about, there's a good chance a lot of people will walk past rather than stop to help. And there's an experiment that's been done in pretty much every major city that has a university with a psychology department. You'll find that people have been out there pretended to be unwell near major railway stations or in city centres. Excuse me, pardon me. And people have just walked past. And it's for anything up to 20 minutes, people can pretend to be very ill, and there are problems with people stopping. But there are some opinions that have been put forward that we live in a fast-paced world and people don't want to stop. It's all quick fixes. But the early studies on this were done in the 1960s, when around the world people were things, we didn't have quite such a fast pace of life. And it does seem to be almost universal. You've actually got more chance of people stopping if you're in a country lane somewhere and there's just one person coming across, and they'll try to help. It seems to be that if that situation occurs and people start walking past, then everyone picks up on the rule that, oh yeah, we do nothing. We don't help, that person's there, but our rule is we'll just walk past. Interestingly, once someone does stop to help, then everyone else starts to help as well. And it's like the rule changes, and the rule is now, yeah, we help, we don't walk past. What's that about? And that sort of transposes to the workplace relatively neatly, in that we have, well, I've seen a lot of scenarios where there's very little reporting of accidents, there's very little reporting of hazards. People are quite willing to walk past a frayed cable or some clearly damaged equipment in the workplace, and somebody else will deal with it, or yeah, just pretend that didn't happen. But once you can get into the workplace reports that yes, people do report it, that's what we do here. It's a bit like Dan Ariely's people in the maths test. Once they realise that's what we do, that's what our team does, you can get reporting up. Sometimes it takes a bit of effort to get the traction on that, because you have to sort of make the reports public to show, yeah, this is what we do here, it's not what we do down the road. People will start picking up on it as, yes, that's our way of working. And even to the extent of, yeah, we're not the ones who take the guards off the machines. We might have a friend who, in his factory, they take the guards off as soon as the machines come in. But what we do here, we do it by the rules. So you can get some more traction, get the incident reporting up so that you can predict the accidents a little bit better. Interestingly as well, people were not left to lie for so long in the street if they were dressed more like the people who were around them. So if you're in a sort of posher area, then having a suit on, excuse me, helped, and vice versa. If you're in a construction site sort of area, if you had boots and a hard hat on, people would stop more quickly if they were dressed in the same sort of way, which is a little odd, but again ties into the things that were seen in the maths test. If you had the same sweatshirt on, you behaved in the same way. So there may be good ways to interpret using uniforms in the workplace if you look at it that way. So yeah, but it all comes down to communication as well at the end of the day. And with communication, your words do matter. You could get into trouble with the slide in front of you in the workplace. Do bears sit in the woods? You've got to be careful what message you're getting across and what message people are used to seeing. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, so words do matter in the workplace. Sometimes people don't think they do. But at the moment, we're looking at words on the internet that are having the effect of 5G networks, the masts being burnt down. People commit suicide after reading things on the internet. There was an old rhyme that we probably heard when we were kids that sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. They do. They hurt people on the internet. They can seriously affect the way that people look at the messages in the workplace. And you've got to be careful. I know from one instance I'll give you, that I got wrong. I got this wrong about 10 years ago. We were looking at organising a fun run, and I did put a poster up that had a picture of a small puppy with a gun to its head, and the tagline on it was "Join in the run or the dog gets it." And it was in too bad taste for a lot of people to get on board with. So yeah, I was told in no uncertain terms not to do that again, which I hadn't. Got to learn from these things. But yeah, you've got to be wary of the way you use phrases when you're designing posters or new procedures. It helps if you use words and phrases that people will understand or be more familiar with, not just from the point of view of foreign language or not. I know some of us work abroad. I've got a little bit of Spanish that I use sometimes when I work that way. But yeah, if you're using words and phrases that are in your locale, that can help. There's one of the studies in the USA involved getting students in the student bars to drink less on the alcohol side of things. And when they just tried to explain to them on the posters that it was bad for you in general, and if you start when you're young, it's just going to get worse, that didn't really change things very much. But they started using words and phrases that the students use themselves. It's local colloquialisms, local phrases, and that improved things by about 30%. There was a big reduction in people drinking alcohol in the bars when they realised that it was being put across in their own language, as it were. So, but as well as that, you can put messages across in some humorous ways, maybe not guns to puppies' heads. We've discovered that doesn't work. But there's an old story concerning soup in a restaurant. There's a woman in a restaurant, she's been served soup, and she says to the waiter, "Waiter, taste my soup." The waiter says, "Why, is it too spicy?" She says, "Taste my soup." And he says, "Is it too cold?" "Waiter, taste my soup." So eventually he says, "Okay, where's your spoon?" And she says, "Aha." So there was no spoon. You can get your message across in ways where it makes people think things through, and then when they finally give in and try to do what you've asked them to do, then they can see what is missing. And there's a lot of ways that can be used in the workplace, whether it's equipment, and whether you're trying to get your message across subtly and practically, or whether there's a new system going into place. Will it work or not? So yeah, personally I like the soup joke. Other people may not. You can put that in the comments back to me if you like. But the other point from that is, yeah, to an extent you can use humour. Be careful about it. We do have to realise that we're not stand-up comedians in the workplace. We are trying to deal with an audience that hasn't paid to come in and listen to us, so their sense of humour may be, may have to be wary of what goes up there. So, yeah. I'm getting through this a little bit more quickly than I originally thought, by the way, so it looks like we'll be finished a little bit early. Focus and distraction. This is something that has some very practical elements in the workplace. I know magicians and pickpockets have been distracting us for centuries, and it's very easy to do. In fact, when it comes to our vision, the actual sharp point of our vision is very small. If you stare at an object straight ahead of you for just a few seconds, you'll start to notice that the outer vision becomes fuzzy. It's not because you're about to pass out or anything like that. It's because our eyes normally dart around a lot, and our visual cortex actually builds up an image from the multiple images that we pick up on that are sharp, and that gives us quite a good general picture of the world. So with magicians, especially with close-up magic, they'll try to get you to focus on the cards right in front of you, and you don't see the cards they're picking out of their pockets, their sleeves, or anywhere else. In this case, a lady stroking a small duckling, and there's some sort of duck behind it picking a handbag. So that sort of thing can be used, and that's the sort of thing that gets used by pickpockets all over the world. They'll distract you with one thing and then raid your pockets while they're doing it. It's worth knowing, especially in a lot of tourist resorts. That sort of thing is almost quite blatant. an experiment you may have come across. This is also on focus and distraction. What they said to people was with this, that there'd be a group of people playing basketball, and they asked them to count how many passes were made between people in white shirts or black shirts, and count the passes. And while that was happening, someone would walk across dressed as a gorilla, much as you can see on the screen there, and afterwards people were asked how many passes were made, and they give a pretty exact number. When they were asked about the gorilla, anything up to 50% of people wouldn't see the gorilla that was walking through. That's because they're focusing so strongly on the ball, on players, and the rest was all just incidental. And that transposes to the workplace more clearly than a lot of things that I've mentioned so far. If you're looking at something like, for example, a goods in yard where a forklift driver is concentrating on the load and getting it on or off one of the lorries, then the chances of them actually seeing a pedestrian walking in, even if they're wearing a high-vis bib and in line with the regulations, there's a good chance that the forklift driver won't see them. And it's worth telling your staff about that, so that they're more likely to watch for themselves rather than assume a driver is going to do their walking for them. And in the same context, depending on what someone is in the goods in yard for, they may be concentrating on getting to the other side of it and just not paying attention to the forklift. So informing both groups that the focus is going to be on something else, and that there's that potential for an accident, that's where it can be very useful in the workplace. I know one place I worked at in Wales, they had a long production line with some very mundane work. They had someone walking up and down between the lines with a pallet truck, and they had one or two accidents where people would stand up and they'd go to talk to their team leader. They wouldn't look for the guy with the pallet truck, and vice versa. So we ran that past them and explained to them, yeah, no one's going to be looking out for you except yourself, and pallet trucks hurt when they smack you in the ankle. So it was put through on the risk assessments, and I'd left not long after that went through, to be honest with you, so I can't give you an honest, it reduced it by this much. But we certainly spoke to them about focus and distraction, so that they were fully up to speed with what might be happening in their own minds and in the workplace. Oops. What I'll do, by the way, I will send some of these notes on here. I will send some of the reference material so that you can look a little bit more deeply into it. We are ahead of schedule. So what I will say is, yeah, in June, I'm going to set a date for Psychology and Safety 2. Also driving safety and psychology. We'll get some dates together for those, so if you'd like to attend them, that would be great. And upcoming pre-presentations as well on anger management, stupidity management, which is like anger management, but it's managing people's stupidity, leadership for business, time management for presentations, which I could learn from today because I'm ahead of schedule by at least 5 minutes, I think, and oratory for business, which is getting people to practice a little more. Last slide is, yes, I do sell stuff. From Monday, there will be a Kindle book on psychology in safety. That's from the 1st of June. We'll cover this material and more. There's also psychology and safety training software, which is available on eBay, and that software runs through a very similar course to this with a bit more detail, a little bit longer. And it gives a database for recording that your staff have seen it, that they understand it, and you can interrogate the database to find out who's done the test and who hasn't. So if you have questions or comments, please either contact me via LinkedIn as per our initial contact, or as you can see at the bottom of the screen, my email address is galt.shropshiresafety@gmail.com. And if you have any comments, I will try to amend the presentation where I can. And yeah, that's the advertisement part. And that's been about 35 minutes instead of 40. So thank you everyone for attending. I'll leave that now, and I hope you enjoyed it, and hope we can talk again. Thank you very much.